"Ready to hit the highway?" asked Don as we finished off our beers. "Yep, I'm ready," I answered. My head was looking forward to checking out Boston, but my heart was wanting to get back to Toronto to be with Jeff and my other friends there. Don switched on the radio and we sat back and enjoyed the ride. We seemed to be driving down country lanes, which reminded me a lot of my hometown's surrounding countryside on the border of England and Wales. This seemed strange to me, as it had been the last thing I was expecting the US to be like. Don followed the signs for Boston, and we had a nice chat as we drove along. The road started to get busier, and I felt it probably meant that we were getting nearer to the city. I felt thrilled at the thought and wondered what it would be like. I wondered if it would be similar to the UK cities, or more like the Canadian cities, or maybe not like either. I'll soon find out, I thought to myself with a grin. At some point, the highway we were on merged with the other highways, and I realized we hadn't seen a sign for Boston in a while. I mentioned this to Don, and he seemed puzzled too. After a while, the highways got less and less busy, until it seemed as though we were back on the country lanes again. So eventually we turned around and headed back in the direction we'd come from. I started to feel my excitement changing into disappointment as we seemed to be driving and driving, but getting nowhere. Eventually we got back to the main junction and saw a sign for Boston again. My mood lifted as we headed off in the direction of the sign. Don seemed happy that I was happy, and he wasn't showing any signs of stress at the situation, which made me feel better. We saw more and more signs for Boston as we went along, so once again we relaxed into the ride and sat back listening to music on the radio. But after a while, suddenly around the same time, we both seemed to notice that we stopped seeing signs for Boston again. "What is going on?" said Don, sounding confused. We both looked at each other with puzzled faces and shook our heads. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "It's so weird," was all I could answer, as we wound up in a desolate area, away from the main traffic once again. So, once again, Don turned around and headed back towards the main junction to try again. "This is crazy," he said, shaking his head and sounding frustrated. I felt bad for him, as he was mainly doing this for me. But within a split second, we both seemed to see the funny side, and we started to laugh. "If at first you don't succeed," said Don, try 100 times, I added, and we both cracked up laughing. "Or 1,000 times, added Don, and we roared with laughter as we started looking for Boston again. After several more tries, and for some reason simply not finding Boston, I noticed a sign for New York, and at this point, feeling delirious with a combination of beer, fatigue, and laughter, I suddenly felt tempted to head there instead. "What about New York?" I said to Don with a mischievous grin. "New York?" he asked curiously. "Well, seeing as we can't find Boston, why not make the most of it and go and see New York instead?" I said with a laugh. "Right," he answered slowly, nodding his head, as if seeming to agree with my fun sense of logic. "New York it is," he exclaimed, as he suddenly changed highways and sped up and started following the signs for New York. This time we saw New York signs all along the way, and the roads got busier instead of quieter. Don switched on his CB radio, and I loved hearing all the different accents from the New York area, as I'd only ever heard such accents on TV before. It was so exciting to be hearing them in real life. I felt as though I was in some kind of movie. By now it was getting late, and Don suddenly said, "So what'll we do when we get there?" "Isn't it the city that never sleeps? There must be loads to do," I answered, and we both laughed. "I guess we'll see when we get there," I added. We never did find Boston.